Back in 1987 is when my career started. I've been coaching and consulting forever. And in 1987, I started. How many of you have heard of a company called Accenture? Management consulting. They're one of the big management consulting companies. When I worked for them, they were 5 years ago. So was doing this project at Mercantile Stores, and it was all about optimizing their inventory. I was a 25-year-old kid, and I led the design team and led the testing team on this brand new strategy to manage their inventory, an automatic replenishment system. We were going to do two great things at the same time. We were going to decrease their inventory investment, but at the same time actually be in stock more often. And I just knew that this was going to make me the youngest partner ever at Accenture. This was going to be phenomenal. You all already get a sense this is not going to end well. And we go live with this system, and we did two things that are actually really hard to do together. Instead of decreasing inventories, we significantly increased inventories. And you would think that would make you in stock more often, but somehow miraculously, we were able to increase inventories and still be out of stock more often than they were before the project. So somehow Accenture kept me on another 5 years after that, but didn't start very well. But I learned something that it took me a while to take action on, but that didn't work for a very specific reason that we're going to talk about. There was one ingredient missing from that caused the tremendous failure. Now, I'm smart, but I'm not that smart. So go out from 1989, let's project forward to 2015. Took me a while to learn this lesson. Project out to 2015, and I now have my own coaching business, and I am sitting in a Starbucks in Brooklyn Heights, New York, across the table from Stephanie, who is the brand new CEO, 6 months in CEO of a marketing firm. She'd worked for the company for a while. She got promoted from COO to CEO about 6 months before, promoted by two brothers that own the place. I feel bad that you guys are behind me. I'm going to go over here a little bit too. Promoted by two brothers that were barely involved in the business, but involved enough to drive Stephanie crazy, sending her in different directions. They didn't agree with each other. And the interesting part of that was the reason Stephanie was meeting with me was she was at a loss. The company had been flat to shrinking for 4 years. They were profitable, but their profit as a percent of sales was 2%, which is barely profitable, kind of bouncing along break even. She believed very strongly that they needed a new strategy. And that's why she was sitting talking to the potential coach about whether I could help her create a new strategy. But I knew something that she didn't know, is I knew that what she had was not a business problem, it wasn't a strategy problem, it was a people problem. What I had learned after so many years of doing it wrong is that every business problem is really a people problem in disguise. The number one driver, and what I'm about to say is going to be the theme of everything I'm going to talk about for the next hour or so, the number one driver of profit growth is people growth. It's not a new strategy. It's not a new product. It's not a new marketplace. I coach leadership teams all day, every day. I work on new product introductions and strategy and new markets. Those are all important. But you have probably seen, like I've seen over the years, I have seen companies with great strategies, but the wrong people, and they fail every single time. I've seen companies with mediocre strategy, but great people, and those great people find a way. They find a way to take that mediocre strategy and make it great. They find a way to execute the hell of, out of that mediocre strategy, zig and zag and learn and grow. The number one driver of profit growth is people growth. I can't tell you how many times I have heard over the years, and I'm sure you have, people are our greatest asset. Some of you may even have said that. I will tell you 95% of the time, that's a load of crap. It's just not true. If people were our greatest asset, we would make people growth our number one priority. And when we do things like have annual performance reviews, does that tell you that people are your number one priority if you're sitting down to have a formal conversation about performance once a year? So I started working with Stephanie and her team, and we started not by fixing their strategy, but by making some really difficult people decisions. Who did we need to coach up? Who needed to be coached out? Who did we need to challenge and develop and re-recruit? And it took time, but this company that was flat to shrinking for 4 years and 2% profitability doubled in revenue, and then doubled in revenue again. Went from 2% profitability to 20% profitability. And I'm still working with Stephanie and her team today, 11 years later. And there's still hard decisions they need to make. And what I want to share with you over lunch, while you're eating, and I'm not, I'm going to share with you some of the tactics and strategies that we used to help grow her people. Now, why is this important? Let's put some dollars and cents behind it. Boston Consulting Group did a study of over 1,200 companies and found that companies that they identified as talent magnets, which means those companies scored high in 20 different categories of leadership and talent development. Those companies grew 2.2 times faster, top line, grew the bottom line 1.5 times faster than the talent laggards, the companies that didn't score high on those same 20 attributes. There is no new market opportunity, new product, new strategy that can consistently get that kind of top and bottom line growth. And I will tell you, there's a whole lot in the world these days, some of it's going on in the news as we speak, that we have no control over. The one thing I know that we all have control over within our businesses is what we're doing to grow our people. What are we doing to coach and develop and have the difficult conversation and coach people out if they're not the right fit? We have 100% control over that. Now, when we think about growing our people, that's not a new concept, right? None of you are saying, oh my God, I had no idea we needed to coach into, thank God this little guy from New Jersey came to tell us we need to grow our people. We know that, right? But what are some of the things, shout them out, when you think about people growth, when you think about this idea, we tend to call it performance management is the umbrella term we put over this. What are some of the things we do to grow our people? Anybody, what do we do? How many of you do annual performance reviews? How many of you believe annual performance reviews are the worst invention ever created in business? And by the way, some of you are saying, that's why we do them quarterly. You do a crappy process 4 times a year. Congratulations. But when we think about performance management, it's things like annual and quarterly performance reviews, joint goal setting, 360 reviews, and some of them work, some of them don't. But here's the challenge. Mercer did a study back in 2019 and found that only 2% of leaders believe that their performance management processes were adding significant value. If the number one driver of profit growth is people growth, if we truly believe people are our greatest asset, and performance management, our performance management processes are only working 2% of the time, we need a better way. We need to be doing something different. So I created something called the talent density model. The talent density model is the model that I used with Stephanie and her team to go from flat to shrinking to doubling twice, from 2% profitability to 20% profitability. It's a process that I've honed over the last 12 years working with clients. So let's talk about what that looks like. Within this talent density model, let me step back a minute. Within this model, the purpose of the model is to help you assess the performance of your team members. Based on that assessment, figure out what actions you need to take and how you need to hold yourself and others accountable for growing strength of talent within your organization. So how do we assess performance using this model? It starts off with two components, two axes. The first is productivity. Now, there are two words that get used interchangeably in business. And one of the things I'd like to do today is to get you all to stop using them interchangeably. And those two words are productivity and performance. In my mind, performance is made up of two components, productivity and culture fit. And I will argue culture fit is the more important of the two. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a little while. But performance and productivity get used interchangeably, and I get leaders coming up to me and saying, Mike, what do I do if I have someone on my team that's a high-performing jerk? Well, if you define productivity and performance in the right way, that's not possible. Because if someone is a jerk, they're probably not a great culture fit, which means, yes, they may be highly productive, but they're not high in performance. Because to be high in performance, it's about culture fit and productivity. So what does that mean? Let's start with productivity, because productivity is the word we know, the thing we measure. But what I find is most leaders measure it really badly. I was doing a workshop with a group of about 80 leaders 4 months ago. And I had them do an exercise, and I'm not going to have you do, I was doing a 3-hour workshop with them versus an hour lunch and learn. But I had them do an exercise, and I did this exercise with the group I was with this morning, is I had them list out all of their direct reports, and then how they measure success for each of those direct reports. What were the key performance indicators they used to measure success? The only thing they did really well, and I commended them for it, was they did a really good job of listing out who their direct reports were. When it came to how they measured success, they had to think about it. And by the way, if those leaders had to think about it and struggle and finally start writing some things that they made sense, what are the chances their direct reports understand what those measures are? Of course they didn't. So what does it mean when we think about measures of success, when we think about productivity measures of success? Let's talk about so productivity measures of success. I thought I had another slide there for it that I don't, so I'll just talk through it. When we think about productivity measures of success, it's not 18 KPIs, right? That's a whole lot of data. It's not a lot of information. It's 2 to 4 measures of success. The higher the frequency, the better. Here's what I want you to, here's your productivity measure this year. That's not very helpful, right? That's not very helpful this year. What do I have to accomplish this quarter is better, although not great. Monthly is better than quarterly. Weekly, if you could do it, is better than monthly. The higher the frequency of your measures, the more you're able to get those signals if things aren't going well. The more you're able to hold people accountable. So we want 2 to 4 KPIs, and you should be working on them collaboratively with your team. If I give Janice what her 4 KPIs are and she doesn't achieve them, she's probably going to look at me and say, I didn't buy into those numbers anyway. Right? So you want to be doing it collaboratively. Productivity is not about how long and hard someone is working. Someone might be working long and hard because they're not productive. I remember I've been coaching and consulting almost my whole life, but I did work for a company for about 3 years, and I worked for the CFO. And once a month, I would go in on a Saturday to do work. I finished all my work by Friday. Why do you think I went in on a Saturday? Because the CFO was there every weekend. And if he didn't see you in on a weekend, he didn't think you were working very hard. So I went in there, sat in my office, read the Wall Street Journal for a couple of hours, and then went home. You know, I had leaders when the world shut down for COVID. Leaders say to me, how do I hold my people accountable if I can't see what they're doing? I said, are you kidding me? Like, the way you measure productivity is by watching how hard they're working. One of the interesting things that came out of COVID for a lot of my clients is a realization that they needed real measures of productivity. And then culture fit. How many of you, for culture fit, how many of you have a set of core values that are non-negotiable behaviors that anchor your culture, that you have documented and communicated out through your organization? How many of you have that? A few. Not enough. Not enough. If you don't, because we're going to come back to this idea of culture fit in a little bit, an easy way to think about it, right? It's easy to say, well, we don't have core values. I guess we can't assess people on culture. Well, that's not true. The way I want to coach you to think about culture, when you think about your direct reports and the rest of your company and how you assess their performance, culture more than anything else is when you think of one of your team members, are they making the people around them better or worse? Are they adding to or subtracting from the culture that you want to create? That's what a great culture fit is. So if we put it together into what I call the talent density model, right? One of the key steps we've got to take is assessing performance using the model. Productivity and culture fit come together and give us 4 different categories of performance. If someone is high in both productivity and culture fit, those are my high-performing team members. Pretty straightforward. If someone is low in culture fit, notice this is key. Someone is low in culture fit. Notice how the line goes all the way across. Anybody want to tell me what that means?
They need to be exited.
Well, it might be, but what does it mean that the line goes all the way across? What it means is, I don't care how productive they are. They could be my number one salesperson from a revenue standpoint, from a productivity standpoint. If they are not living my non-negotiable core values, if they're making the people around them worse and not better, they are a low culture fit. They are more than likely toxic to your organization. And that's why there's no such thing as a high-performing jerk, because you're not high-performing if that's who you are. If someone is low in productivity, they're low producing. And then there's a bunch of folks in the middle. If you are not high enough to be high-performing or low enough to be in one of the 2 low-performing categories, then you're medium-performing. Now, the question you might be asking, you probably should be asking, is who cares? Why do we need to categorize people's performance. You probably already know it's not so come annual performance review time. You can tell people, congratulations, you're high performing, you're medium performing. You may want to pick a different industry. You're medium performing. That's not why we do it. The reason why we have these categories is as a company, and most importantly, as a leadership team, and this should start at a senior leadership team level. If you're not on the senior leadership team, start from wherever you are. But at a team level, we need to have a common language to assess performance, a common language to take action. And I'm going to share with you actions for different levels of performance. A common way to hold people accountable to move folks up and to the right. Now, here's the other thing that's important to point out is the labels. High performing, medium performing, low producing. In the book I wrote before The Strength of Talent, called Breakthrough Leadership Team, which I'm very proud of. I'm sure you're all going to read that book too. I have an older version of this model. And I called these categories A player, B player, C player, toxic C player. It's catchier, right? It's more memorable. Why'd I change it to this, which is kind of boring category names? But I was working with a client and I was doing a 2-day kickoff of my work with them. And in the 2-day kickoff, I do the first of many, what I call the quarterly talent assessment meeting, where we assess performance in the way I'm about to share with you. And for most of my clients, I work with them quarter after quarter throughout the year, doing their annual planning and quarterly planning. Part of what we do in the quarterly planning session is assess the performance of their direct reports, come up with actions, hold them all accountable for moving folks up and to the right or out on this model. So I was kicking it off with a brand new client, and we were talking about folks right here, and I was calling them B players. And the way they started talking about these folks made me feel ill. And it partially made me feel ill because it was my fault. Because I had labeled them with this, they're a B player. So the way they started talking about them is they said things like, well, you know B players, they just want to go home at 5 o'clock. They want to do enough not to get fired, and they're not going to do any more. They were talking about these folks as if the doctor came out 30 years ago and said, I'm so sorry, your wife has given birth to an 8-pound, 2-ounce B player. I'm terribly sorry. I stopped and I said, wait a minute, is it possible? Is it at all possible that these folks are performing at that level because of you? Because you're not coaching and developing them enough. Because you haven't inspired them with a company vision. Because you've got too many low-performing folks running around getting in their way. And they realize very quickly, yeah, some of this is on us. So by saying someone is medium performing, that says that's not who they are, that's how they're performing right now. Even high performing, you might say, well, calling somebody an A player, well, that's a compliment. And it is. But here's the problem. If I believe you're an A player, what's your name?
Aaron.
Aaron. If Aaron's an A player, I don't know about you, but what clicks in my brain is, thank God she's an A player. That's who she is. I don't have to worry about Aaron. I can go focus on all my problem children over here. Is that the way I ought to be treating one of my top performing team members? But that's what we do. So by saying Aaron is high performing, that's not who she is. That's how she's performing right now. In my brain, I want to figure out, how do I help her keep that performance up? How do I make sure she never wants to leave here? How do I help her grow even more? Notice the only category that doesn't have the ing at the end is low culture fit. That's not a mistake. When someone is not living your core values, when someone is a bad culture fit, and I said earlier, like someone who's a high performing jerk, by the way, if someone is not a culture fit, it doesn't mean they're a jerk. It might. But what it means is they're a bad fit for your culture. That's all it means. They may be wonderful people. You may have a culture of teamwork and collaboration, and they like to work in a corner by themselves. And they're going to go cure cancer in a corner, and I want to keep them in that corner doing that. But that's not what your company is all about. Your company may be about collaboration. But the reason why there's no ing at the end is because this is 9 out of 10 times not changeable. It is who they are. If you've got someone on your team that is not living your core values, trying to coach them to live core values they're not already living is like trying to get them to become someone they're not. Now, if you put them on a performance improvement plan and threaten them with job security if they don't shape up in 90 days and start treating the customer service team with more respect, can they fake it for 90 days? Most can. But then they fall back down to who they really are, which is not a bad person, but it's a bad fit for your organization. Now, we are not in the time we've got going to have all of you do the assessment. I worked with a group this morning for a few hours. I'm working with a group tomorrow for a few hours, and they're actually going to assess their folks. But I have online something called the Talent Density Quick Assessment. Don't do it now, but if you click the QR code, you can actually at least get to the website. And what that's going to allow you to do is, based on that model, and in the book and on the quick assessment, there are details around what productivity scores and culture fit scores need to be. How do you score them? It's not as simple as I think they're high in both, so I'm going to make them high performing. So the quick assessment takes that into account. So we're not going to cover that in detail in the short time that we've got, but I wanted to give you a chance to do the quick assessment. Now, when most folks look at their team, and you've got high performing folks, medium performing folks, low producing, low culture fit, where do your leaders spend most of their time? How many of you find you're spending most of your time with your lowest performing team members? And I would imagine even some of you not raising your hand feel that way. For years, I overinvested in my low performers and underinvested in my high performers. And I find most leaders do that. They overinvest in their low performers, they underinvest in their high performers, partially because they don't know any better, partially because they don't know what actions to take. And in a couple minutes, I'm going to share the actions that you ought to take. But here's what happens, and it feels natural, right? You're low performing folks. That's where the fires are that you've got to put out. Of course, I've got to go spend time. And if Janice is one of my high performing team members, there's no fire there. I don't need to spend time with her. But here's what happens. When you work day in and day out with one of your low performing team members, first off, when you do that, how does that make you feel? Do you love doing that? Does that make you want to get up every day and start work? How does it make that low performing team member, how are they feeling when you're struggling with them day in and day out and they're struggling with their performance? How do they feel? Pretty crappy, right? But if we work with them day in and day out, are they going to improve? Some will. Some will. Are they going to go from low performing to high performing? Pretty rarely. It happens, but pretty rarely. Normally what happens is this. They go from unacceptable low performance, they improve, and go from unacceptable to barely acceptable. When we're doing that and we're ignoring our high-performing team members, what happens to them? Anybody, what happens to them? What's that? Some of them might leave because, by the way, if they're not growing with you, they're going to grow with somebody else. They will leave. What else happens to those high-performing team members if they don't leave? They stagnate, right? They stagnate. They might get frustrated that they're not getting the attention. You're spending all the time with the low-performing folks. And you know, if you're not growing, you're slowly dying. Now, are they going to go from high-performing to low-performing? My experience is no. They're not going to go from high-performing to low-performing, but they're going to dip. Now, think about what you've got when you are spending significant portions of your time, more time with your low-performing team members. You get higher low performance and lower high performance, which in my book leads to something I like to call polished mediocrity. Polished mediocrity does not lead to greatness. Polished mediocrity does not lead to a lot of sleep at night. When you have this, some of you might find you have to do a lot of work that your team members should be doing. So we need to focus on our high-performing team members. You do not create greatness by fixing weakness. You create greatness by leveraging and maximizing strength. That's as an individual and with your team. So let's talk about actions. I mentioned part of the reason why leaders spend so much of their time with low-performing folks and don't spend enough time with high-performing folks. Some of that is because they don't know any better. They don't realize they should be investing more. But some of us, like me many years ago, some of us do know better, but we still don't take action. And I remember I didn't take action back in my consulting days when I had teams working for me and I was forced to do the annual and the quarterly performance reviews. I had the easiest time doing performance reviews for my lowest performing people. That doesn't sound right, does it? But here's why it was easier. If I had a low performing team member, all I had to do was say, of the 18 things they're screwing up, let me pick the top 3 and let them know they're screwing that up and give them some coaching and advice on how to fix that, right? That's not that hard to do. But then I'd come across someone working for me that was smarter and harder working than I was. What can I do to help them? My thought was, I just need to get out of their way and let them work. What am I going to do? They're better and smarter than I am. So what I want to share with you is a whole bunch of actions that you could and should take for your highest performing team members. First, challenge them. I have seen more high-performing team members leave out of boredom than anything else. And challenging them does not mean challenge them to work 70-hour weeks, right? This is not about burning out our best people. Challenge them is about challenging them to learn something new, do something new, be someone new, raising the bar on their productivity targets. Increase their responsibility. If you feel stretched too thin, how might you increase the responsibility of one of your highest performing team members? Again, without overloading them and burning them out, what could you do to increase their responsibility? I know when I was kind of up and coming working for other people, that's all I wanted was more responsibility. Invest in them. Time, money, send them to training, send them to an industry conference, hire them a coach. Remove obstacles. If they're following a crappy process, challenge them to fix the process. Sometimes the biggest obstacle in the way is a whole bunch of low producing and low culture fit folks you've got running around, which we'll talk a little bit about. Promote them. Reward them, monetary or non-monetary. Recognition. Could be public recognition at a monthly all hands. Hey, stand up. Let's give Erin a round of applause for the great job she did on X. Or it could be very heartfelt, private pat on the back. Exposure. Most leaders miss this one. Exposure could be internal or external. I'm going to start with external. External exposure is getting a team member more exposure maybe to your clients. How do we get this person in front of our clients more, or our vendors, or the community, or the industry group? You know, let's get them on stage at the next industry conference. Exposure could also be internal. Let's say I'm the COO. And what's your name? Tom. Tom works for me. Tom works for me. I'm the COO. And Tom is one of my highest performing team members. Now, I'm on the senior leadership team. How many of you are on your senior leadership teams? Do most of you have like weekly senior leadership team meetings, which may or may not be the most exciting parts of your week? They should be if you do them right, but normally not so much. But Tom doesn't get to go to the senior leadership team meeting because he works for me and I'm the COO. What if I said to Tom, who's one of my high-performing team members, hey, Tom, you know every Tuesday from 10 to 11, I'm in that senior leadership team meeting? Do me a favor, block that off on your calendar next month. Block that off on your calendar next week, because I want you to come to the senior leadership team meeting. The work you did on the new product development process, I've never seen a project managed that well. I want you to share how you did it with the rest of the senior leadership team. Tom, how are you feeling if you're not a member of the senior leadership team? How are you feeling if you get invited to the senior leadership team meeting?
Feeling pretty good.
Just pretty good, right? Now, most might be a little nervous about it, but man, if that was me, I'd go home, I'd tell my wife, I'd tell my kids, I'd tell the dog, I get to go to the senior leadership team meeting. So give them exposure. Career planning. For your highest performing team members, when is the last time you sat with them to find out where they want to go in their career? Sorry, just getting rid of something here. Where they want to go in their career and how you could best help them. How often are you doing that? Lastly, there we go. Please, 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 do not wait for an exit interview to find out why one of your high-performing team members left. Have a stay interview now. And what does that mean? A stay interview, again, if Tom is one of my high-performing team members, I'm going to sit down with Tom. And I'm going to say, Tom, so thankful for you. You're doing such an amazing job. Tom, what do you love most about your role here? Now, I don't really need an answer. No, I'm out. As a matter of fact, Mike, I was just ready to quit. But I'm going to want to find out what Tom loves most about the role. And then we're going to talk about how we can get him doing more of what he loves. Then I'm going to say, Tom, what is it that frustrates you about your role? And we're going to talk about that and find out if we can solve some of that for him. And then I've had leaders ask the super scary question. Tom, what would it take for you to leave? Now, I hope for your high-performing team members, I hope you have an honest enough, trusting enough relationship with them that some of them might actually tell you the truth. And Tom might say to me, Mike, I've always wanted to do more strategic work, and my work here has been really tactical. If I got another opportunity to do more strategy stuff, I'd probably take it. Or he might say to me, hey, we're saving up for a house, and it's been kind of tough. If I got an offer for 20% more to do something similar, I'd be honest, Mike, I'd be tempted to take it. Does that mean I'm going to make a decision right there to give him a raise? Maybe that's up to me. But isn't it important that I know that before he leaves that I've got to try and negotiate to bring him back? So for each of your high-performing team members, I believe you must have a plan of what you're going to do with and for them over the next 30, 60, 90 days. Let's talk about medium performing. What do we do there? Well, they're medium performing because they're a little lower than you'd like them to be on some combination of culture, fit, and productivity. So number one, of course, we're going to try and coach them up. We may even try to change their role. If they're lower in productivity, maybe we can change their role to something that better leverages their strengths. But let me ask you a question. If you had to do it all over again, start with a clean sheet of paper, would you enthusiastically rehire everyone on your team? People normally get really uncomfortable with that question. It's a really hard one. And I'll tell you, I've been asking leaders that question for probably about 12 years now. And I used to think the reason why that question caused people really quickly to shake their head or get kind of a queasy feeling, I used to think it was because, they must have a lot of low-performing team members running around their organization. But what I found out is typically that's not why it makes them uncomfortable. The reason why that's a tough question, if you had a chance to do it all over again, would you enthusiastically rehire everyone on your team, is because for a lot of us, we have a lot of folks on our team that are good enough. They're fine. Would I enthusiastically rehire them? No, I probably want to hire somebody better, but they're not doing so bad that I would fire them. That's a really tough position to be in. We are not going to create greatness by having a whole bunch of mediocre people. So it begs the question, is our goal in this model, in our talent density model, is our goal to have everybody up, 100% of our people in high-performing territory? How many of you think that's our goal? We need 100% of our people high-performing. No one. I think the answer is nuanced. And I agree with those of you that didn't raise your hand, but I think it's more nuanced than yes and no. I think as leaders, we should all be striving to move everyone up and to the right. We should be striving to get everyone in high-performing territory. Why the hell not? It's good for them, it's good for us, it's good for our clients, it's good for our vendors. But I don't think it's realistic to say that's our goal. Because by the way, remember, part of what we do when we get someone up in high-performing territory is we challenge them, we promote them, we increase their responsibility, which may have them tumble back down to medium-performing territory for a little while. So while that's not our goal, here's where it gets even more nuanced. There are, I believe, two different roles, two different types of roles within our organizations where good enough is not good enough. One of those roles is anyone on your senior leadership team. I believe anyone on your senior leadership team that's not high performing needs to have a very high potential to get there within the next 3 to 6 months, or they do not belong on the team. The impact medium performing individuals, the impact a senior leadership team member has down and out through the organization is too big for mediocre. How often have you seen a high performing team member work for a mediocre boss very long? Two things happen. They either leave and go somewhere else they can grow, or they become mediocre as well. But there's one other type of role that's going to cause you to do a little bit of thinking. And I'm going to use Netflix as an example. Because the other type of role is a role that is something within your core competency, a strategically differentiating role. If we use Netflix as an example, it's the answer to the question, what makes Netflix Netflix? If you think about the different roles Netflix probably has within their organization, what's an example of a role within Netflix where they absolutely cannot tolerate mediocre performance? It's a role that makes Netflix Netflix. What's an example of a role like that for Netflix? What's that? Acting? Well, they don't have actors that work for, but so he said technology. More specifically,
You need to be able to, when you log in, it needs to work.
yeah, so more specific, number one, whoever is keeping your network up and running, holy crap, they better be high performing if you're Netflix. Whoever is driving your user interface, specifically your recommendation engine to get us binge watching more and more and more, we can't afford mediocre. Now you said acting, I'll pull it back and say maybe not acting, but whoever is driving content development. Netflix can't afford mediocre there. But on the other hand, if Netflix has a 20-year accounts payable veteran, that's a good, solid performer, but they're never going to be high performing. Is that okay for Netflix? I would say, yeah. I don't think Netflix needs to have superstar accounts payable clerks, but they better have folks running their networks, their UI content development that are the best of the best. So I challenge you to think about, when you think about your team, is what is your version of what makes Netflix Netflix? What are your core competencies that differentiate you from the competition? And then look at who you have playing driving roles for those areas. And those folks, if you want to create a great company, those folks are just not the right fit. Let's go to your low performing categories. And I want to share a little philosophy here before we talk about what you do for low producing and low culture fit. And it's actually a little different for both. But how many of you believe what just appeared on the screen? How many of you believe everyone could be a superstar? Show of hands. How many of you believe that? Here's where I lose half the room, right? But someone just said it. What about now? I believe this not only as a leader, I believe it as a father. So I have a son and a daughter, and my son, who's 30, he has something called Asperger's syndrome. And if you don't know what that is, it's on the autism spectrum. And by the way, if you do a Google search, Mike Goldman TED Talk, I do a whole TED Talk about, frankly, what a crappy dad I was when he was about 12 years old. So why am I bringing my son. So I saw a news report that was near and dear to my heart because of my son, that was about one of the big high-tech firms hiring only autistic adults to do their system testing, to test all their computer code, back when it was human beings doing that and not AI. And why were they hiring only autistic adults? Because those autistic adults had a much better ability than most any of us, unless any of you are on the spectrum, had a much better ability to hyper-focus on one thing over and over again and look for small changes. And that's what they needed. Everybody has the ability to be a superstar somewhere. And what that means, what that means is sometimes the kindest thing we can do for one of our low performing folks is to set them free to go become a high performer somewhere else. Right? And we need to go into it with eyes wide open. Everybody deserves coaching. I am not saying if they're low performing, cut the cord now, send them on their way. Everybody deserves coaching. So if you've got someone who is in low producing territory, work with them. Work with them on whatever piece of productivity they're falling down on, and or maybe you can change their role to better leverage their strengths. If someone is low culture fit, go in with eyes wide open. Everyone deserves coaching. But we said earlier, what are the chances of having someone who's not living your core values begin to live your core values? 9 out of 10 times, it's not going to work very well. So they deserve coaching. But we need to keep it, we need to have eyes wide open and when we do that. Now, the other thing we need to talk about with the low producing and low culture fit is how much time do we give them? How long could they be low performing before we take action? And I will tell you, I'm constantly amazed, although I shouldn't be, at what I see. Is I'll work with a company and someone will be in low performing territory and I'll say, how long have they been there? Oh, at least a year. And then they'll say they think that person needs more coaching. They've been there a year and yet you still think somehow you're going to fix it. And you know the answer I get more often than not? I haven't talked to them about it yet. That's leadership malpractice. But we see it all the time. We say it's complicated. It's not complicated. You just have to put your big boy pants on or your big girl pants on and have the difficult conversation about someone's performance. I see it all the time. Now, in terms of time frame, so I do this every quarter with my leadership teams. We do this exercise and we've got up on a flip chart with little post-it notes where everybody is, all their direct reports, who's high, who's medium, who's in the 2 low categories. And if Janice has got someone who is in one of the 2 low performing categories, I will say to Janice, what are we doing? Are we coaching up or are we coaching out? Now, the first time I do that with a client, when I do my kickoff, I need to set the bar of accountability pretty high. So let's say Janice says to me, if this is our first time doing it, Janice says, I really think I can coach him. I'm really going to coach him. Janice, that's great. Let us know how we can help. Love it. But Janice, you need to know something. Remember, this is a quarterly talent assessment, which means 90 days from now, we're going to be right back here doing this again. If he's still in low performing territory and you still believe he needs more coaching, you might be our problem. That hits everybody hard, as it should. We cannot afford to have low performing folks running around our organization, hurting our team members, hurting our clients, hurting themselves. Yeah.
Mike, could you twist it a little bit toward, I have a feeling there are a few people here that are saying,
Oh. Do we have alcohol here? So I just had this conversation earlier. How many family businesses do we have? A whole bunch, more than half. So first thing there, and how many people here are actually the CEO or the owner of the number one person in the family business? Good amount. Okay. So first I would say if you are in control of that, that's why I asked who's kind of the leader, the owner, is that of course family is important and I would never downplay that. And you have to decide what kind of company you want to build. And very often when I speak to leadership teams or small groups, I get, yeah, this person has been hurting the company for 3 years, significantly hurting. You know, we've had people leave because of this person. We've had clients leave, but it's Uncle Joe. We can't fire Uncle Joe. You need to make a decision. It's your decision to make. If your decision is we can't fire Uncle Joe, then you just have to know what you're building. And way more than likely, you are never going to build something great. If you're keeping people around, family or not, that are hurting the business, or even not as bad as hurting the business, but they're not driving business growth. So you need to make that decision. And if your decision is it's all about family, family is most important, then God bless you. That's a decision you could make and go into it with open eyes. When you are part of a business, family or not, but more often this comes up in family businesses, where you're not the owner, the leader, the founder, the CEO, you're somewhere down in the organization and you're frustrated because there are people around that, God, we can't get rid of Uncle Joe. Poor Uncle. Does anybody have an Uncle Joe? I do, and he's actually a good guy. I don't know why I'm hitting on him like that. But if you are not in a role where you're in control of that decision, you need to focus on what you can control. Then you control as best you can your organization. And you also control whether you're working for that family business. If you're in a frustrating situation and I don't want to work for a place where we have folks that are hurting the business because their family, you have the ability to go make a different decision. But the key is you've got to focus on what you can control. And regardless of whether Uncle Joe is still around and he's hurting the business, but you can't do anything about it, that doesn't mean you can't do the best you can to take care of your high-performing team members and coach your medium-performing team members up. Doesn't mean you can't do a whole lot of things to help the business. You just have to focus on what you can control, right? It's easy for me to say, family business or not, you've got to make the tough decisions. I'd love to say that, but I know that's not always reality. So we focus on what we can control. Does that help?
One quick thing, I think it's in honor of Ed Monty. Ed Monty, many of us knew him, and he had an incredible ability to take a family dynamic that wasn't working and work with the family to produce some incredible outcomes. And I miss him. This organization misses him tremendously, and I'm looking for someone like that as a resource for us. So just to throw that in.
Yeah, and by the way, just a little side story. One of the family businesses that I worked for, this was about 10 years ago. It was second generation. First generation was retired in Florida. I was working with second generation, son who was about 40 years old, who was CEO, but dad, who was supposedly retired in Florida, was lobbing bombs in. So I'm meeting with the CEO. I had never met the dad. The dad was in Florida. I'm in New Jersey working with the CEO. And the CEO, every time I get together with him, all he's doing is complaining about his father. And I got two things on my mind. Number one, as a coach, I've got to get him to focus more on what he can control, and he can't control his dad. And he's got to be exaggerating how crazy his old man is. After my third time meeting with the son, with the CEO, I'm walking out of their office building and my phone rings. It's a 954 area code, which is Florida. I don't know that many people in Florida. I understand you're working with my son. Oh yeah, it's good to meet you. Do you mind if I give you some advice on working with him? Sure. He's unprofessional. He's overweight. He's late for meetings. He doesn't communicate well. He doesn't hold himself accountable. He goes on 2 minutes straight, I swear, without taking a breath. And then he finishes, and I just went, appreciate it. Thank you so much. And we ended the call. And I thought, do I even tell my client, the son, that I had that conversation? Of course not. To this day, he never knows his dad called me. So, but you know what we did that was interesting with his dad, and this is very off topic, but just to finish the story, what we did with his dad, by the way, was a wonderful guy. A little too hard on his son, but he was a wonderful guy, brilliant guy, had really built a great business, and he just wanted to continue to be useful. Yes, he was retired or partially retired in Florida. He wasn't trying to be a pain in the ass. He wanted to be useful. So what we did is me and the son talked and said, where does his father really shine? And where could his father add real value that the son, frankly, wasn't very good at? And the dad was like the mayor of every industry group they were a part of. And the dad, you know, he was just such a great ambassador to clients, to industry groups. So he actually gave, you know, asked his dad, he said, look, we have a real problem. We definitely want more visibility externally to industry groups, to clients, to vendors that we work with. Is that something you think you could spend more time doing? And frankly, part of it was to get his dad away from stuff that he was hurting, but it was a way to do it. And they did that, and it went really, really well in leveraging the dad's strength. So the story ends up very good, even though it was a tough one. Last thing I want to share with you before I wrap up is one of the first things I mentioned was this philosophy that the number one driver of profit growth is people growth. Most of you kind of nodded your head at that, but there's actually a significant problem with that statement. Have you all heard the cliche, you can't manage what you don't measure? It's a cliche because it's true for the most part. Think about that statement. The number one driver of profit growth is people growth. Do you all measure profit growth? Of course you do. If I went around this room, and don't worry, I won't. If I went around this room, you could all probably tell us down to the 1/10% how you're doing on profitability compared to last year and compared to plan. But if I said to you, how you doing on people growth? I get answers like, well, pretty good. We're almost caught up with our annual performance reviews. Those aren't measures. So using the talent density model, I want to give you a measure. And for those of you taking that talent density quick assessment, the QR code I shared earlier, you'll actually get this measure as part of it. But I created something called the talent density indicator, the TDI. The TDI is a measure of strength of talent within your organization. It's the mother of all leading KPIs, of leading indicators. This number goes up, your business is going to improve. So what is it? How do we calculate it? The talent density indicator, very simply, is when you assess your team or your company. It's the percent of folks that are high performing minus the percent that are low performing. So it's your high performing percent minus your low performing percent. When you do that, you're going to get some number between negative 100% and positive 100%. If you have all low performing team members, low producing or low culture fit, and no high performing, then you're at negative 100%. It's 0 minus 100. If you have all high performing folks, you're at 100%. To make sure you're following the math, if you have all medium performing team members, what's your TDI? 0, because it's 0 minus 0. This becomes a benchmark This becomes the way to know beyond anecdotally, whether as a company or as a team or for a leader, what's my sales TDI versus my marketing TDI? What's my senior leadership TDI versus my middle manager TDI? What's Tom's TDI versus Yanis's TDI? Use it as a benchmark. And the idea is not that there's one perfect number. Very often when I do this, a lot of folks have negative TDIs. They have more low-performing folks than high-performing folks. That's not a recipe for sleeping very well at night. That's not a recipe for a great company, but all it means is you got some work to do. Right? And we know what that work is. I just shared all of the actions. And in the book, The Strength of Talent, it goes into way more detail on what those actions are. If you're at positive 100%, other than the fact that it probably means you're sandbagging, right? But if you have a good high number, 70, 80, 90, 100%, does that mean you have no work to do? No, I actually think your job may be harder because you got a whole bunch of really high-performing team members that you better challenge, because if they're not growing with you, if they're getting bored, they're going to go grow with someone else. So the TDI is critical to give you a measure. Some ways to keep in touch with me. I have a podcast called The Better Leadership Team Show, where I talk about everything around how to create a great leadership team. What we're talking about here in The Strength of Talent is one really important piece of it, but it's not the entire piece. There's a QR code. If you want to click that QR code, and you can fill it out now or fill it out later. That's a way you could subscribe to a weekly video blog that I have. It's also a way if you want to schedule a complimentary coaching call with me, if any of these challenges ring true for you or you want to figure out how to implement this within your organization. Lastly, I started out telling you about my client, Stephanie, who went from flat to shrinking to doubling twice, from 2% profitability to 20% profitability. But that's actually not what I'm most proud of her for, and not what I'm most proud of in the process that we put together. About 5 years ago, and again, I've been working with her, we're in year 11 now. 5 years ago, I got a call from her. She wanted some coaching on how to handle the fact that she was about to buy the two brothers out of the business. So 5 years ago, she bought the business from the two fighting brothers. Now it's hers. On top of that, I was just with her. We meet every quarter, and a few quarters ago, she told me about a trip she was taking with her family. She's got 4 kids. And when I met her, she had a couple kids and hadn't taken a vacation in a few years. She told me about a trip that her family was taking 2 weeks in Iceland. And I said, how do you feel about going away for 2 weeks? And she said, not only do I feel comfortable leaving for 2 weeks and I know my team is going to take care of the business, I know more than that. They're going to improve the business because I'm going to get out of their hair for 2 weeks. So this work of growing your people is not only about profit. I know I make a big deal. The number one driver of profit growth is people growth, and it does drive that profit growth. But this is about your life, and the lives of people that work with you. So I kind of plead with every leadership group that I work with. Stop just saying people are our greatest asset, and truly make people growth your number one priority as a leader. Thanks, everybody.